Good day, everyone. I'm Terry Tucker. It's my privilege to welcome everyone to the Perspectives in Global Development Seminar series. So, as you know, it's a weekly series of talks by thought leaders, innovative development practitioners, policymakers, and scholars from across the world. And our speaker today is a prominent environmental policymaker, Dr. Barbara Botos, who joins us today from Budapest. Her professional work related to environmental and climate-related policy extends back nearly 2 decades to municipal level initiatives in her home country of Hungary. Following a Humphrey Fellowship at Cornell University, in 2009 and 10, Dr. Botos' work expanded to international, EU, and national climate change policy making through the Hungarian Ministry for National Development. She's still with us. We're just saving some bandwidth. Where she served as unit head and later as head of the Department of Climate Policy. Between 2018 and 2022, she served as Deputy Minister of State for Climate Policy at the Hungarian Ministry for Innovation and Technology. And currently, she's Hungarian Ambassador at Large for Climate. A recognized leader in international climate change policy and multilateral negotiations, Dr. Botos was recently a finalist for the position of Executive Secretary of UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Responsible for supervision of Hungary's National Climate Protection Authority, she's had a hand in a wide range of programs and policies, including those related to national fluorinated gas regulation, the European emissions trading system, numerous climate and energy projects, including a number of them related to green transportation, renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy innovation, and climate adaptation projects. And many of those initiatives involved mobilizing support from the European Emission Trading Scheme and the Modernization Fund. Dr. Botos is also the main author of the Hungarian Life IP Coal Phase-Out Project, an initiative that involves 22 consortium members. She's been actively involved in the UNFCCC and the EU climate negotiations as head of the Hungarian delegation. She also coordinates international and bilateral climate finance programs within the ministry and coordinated establishment of the Western Balkans Green Center in issuance of several international green bonds. So thank you for sharing some of your time and perspectives with us today, Barbara. It's nice to see you back in Ithaca, even if on Zoom. We hope you can make it here in person one of these days soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's so great to hear and see you again, and it's an honor for me to be able to talk to you. Sorry, I'm not showing my video just to save some energy and have more, just to have better internet flow towards you from Budapest, one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. And yes, I was there in Ithaca for almost a year as a Fulbrighter, as a Hubert Humphrey scholar. And you know what they say? If you are a Fulbrighter, you stay a Fulbrighter for the rest of your time. And I can say that because it's this year spent at Cornell University was really a game changer for me. And Terry just played a crucial role in that. So thank you again. After 12 years, Terry, I'm still representing what you were giving us during this scholarship. So my duty is to talk about global climate emergency and the road from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh. As you know, last year we had COP26 in Glasgow, and we are heading towards Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in a few days' time. So let me just start with a really global outlook. This is UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, which says that currently we live in a triple planetary crisis. And this is climate disruption, biodiversity loss, pollution, and waste. And this triple planetary crisis is threatening the survival of millions. putting sustainable development goals at jeopardy, but there is still hope. But unfortunately, I have to say that above these triple planetary crises that we have to cope with, we also had COVID. We still have an energy price crisis. We have the current geopolitical situation, which is the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And we also have food crisis, and we also have fertilizer crisis, and we also have inflation, which is hitting a lot of countries, especially right now here in Europe. So if you have a look at this timeline, this is a very simple timeline of climate change. Fortunately, nobody says, at least I hope so, that nobody is saying right now that climate change is not real. But you know, when we come to the question of coping with it, we always flee from the facts, and we can say, okay, climate change is real. We are just not connected, or it's a natural phenomenon, or it's not caused by humans, or yes, it's caused by humans, but even if it's caused by humans, I cannot do anything, or whatever I can do doesn't really count. And my message is, yes, it counts. Whatever you can do to stop this process, it counts. And then we wake up and we say, oops, and then after that, we don't hear the voice of humanity anymore. So I think before the last stage, we really do have to step up efforts to stop this process. And I guess most of you know what it means to keep global warming within an average 1.5 and or 2 degrees, but we should really strive for keeping it within 1.5. And this is an average temperature increase compared to the industrialization. By average, I mean that it could be 11, 12 degrees in Alaska, and it could be less in certain areas on this globe. But how I could bring it closer to you. So your body temperature, I'm sorry, we are using Celsius degrees here, but your body temperature is 36.5. But you should imagine that for the rest of your life, for the rest of your lifetime on this planet, you will have a body temperature of at least 38 degrees, which is bearable, but it's not comfortable. This is basically called fever. And if we cannot keep it within 1.5, but we go towards 2, then it's 38.5. And if we don't do our homework, it could be 3 and 4, which could be 40 degrees. And your body temperature at 40 degrees is basically when all the irreversible effects start, and then your body cannot survive it anymore. So this is what's happening to the planet. We're approaching fever status, and it's getting really more and more serious. I'm going to talk about, in 30 minutes, about 5 topics. What I see as challenges under the United Nations Framework Convention Climate Change negotiations, what responses I can give to you to these challenges, and this is my personal opinion. And then I will lead you through the road from COP26 to COP27, and I will share with you some very fresh data, some global outlook on what's happening globally. And then I will talk a little bit about Europe mitigation and adaptation efforts in general. So let me start with the challenges under the UNFCCC negotiations. Yes, we are racing against time, and we are about to lose. What we see is there are a lot of interlinking processes, but at the same time, we are also interconnected and vulnerable. And as Gutierrez, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said, is that we can choose between having collective suicide, or we can have some collective solution. And the best time to stop this really downward spiral of this multifaceted crisis, the best time was yesterday, but the second best time is basically now. What I see in the negotiations, and when I'm talking about the global north and the global south, is I'm basically talking about the developing world and the developed countries. So what I see is that there is really a problem internationally, because we fail to work together as a multilateral global community. Everybody is turning on its own back on the values of trust and solidarity, although trust and solidarity are the basic values of the United Nations. And this humanity's welfare and even our survival and future depends on solidarity. And at the same time, there is also growing inequality among countries that jeopardizes our survivals. And this inequality that is between countries, this mistrust, that leads to mistrust. And people don't trust anymore any form of governance. And then we just know what happens when there is inequality. It results in xenophobia, in intolerance, in hate speech and disinformation and wars like the present geopolitical situation. And these are the acts that we all condemn. And these are the acts that are against all United Nations values. So there is a breakdown of trust between the global north and south, and I will explain why. It is really not clear what can be considered as a success towards the next stop in the current crisis situation. Why am I saying that? Because according to developing countries, in Glasgow, we, the global north, and I'm talking about you, the Americans, and I'm talking about all the Europeans, we were talking too much about mitigation, and we were not talking enough about financing, adaptation, and loss and damages. And that happened all over the world. But at the same time, what I think that in Glasgow, the Glasgow Climate Pact was not only limited to mitigation, but there were a lot of other agreed items like building resilience to climate change, which is adaptation, curbing greenhouse gas emissions, which is mitigation, and of course, to provide the necessary finance for it. The other problem that is in this crisis situation, in this breakdown between the global south and the north, is that in 2009 in Copenhagen, when your former President Obama was there, the developing world, the global north, was promising to the global south that annually we are going to provide $100 billion of finance to developing countries. And this was a pledge. This was an extremely important handshake between the two groups of countries. And we haven't been able to meet it. And we were supposed to meet it in 2020. And even in 2020, we were at $90 billion US dollars. And in 2021, we were still not achieving 100 billion. So we promised that we will achieve it, and we will double the climate finance provided to the global south on adaptation by 25. The third issue that I see as a difficulty when we move towards Sharm el-Sheikh from Glasgow is that everybody especially from African countries and LDCs, the least developed countries, would like to see a financial mechanism on loss and damage. And of course, this is our objective, to find a common understanding on how we would like to deliver on activities that relate to loss and damage and to avert loss and damage in the future. And number 4 issue is the equity issues. By equity issues, I mean anything starting from just transition to response measures, to gender, to indigenous knowledge, everything that is not the mainstream negotiation package. But equity issues are everywhere. For example, developing countries keep saying that we, the developed countries, are responsible for historical greenhouse gas emissions, and we are and we use 75% of the carbon budget to keep within 1.5 degrees, which means that who has the right of development? Who has the right of using the rest of the carbon budget? And then there is also just transition as an equity issue. You know, we are all going through energy transition, but at the same time, just transition is not energy transition. Just transition is dealing with the social and economic aspects of energy transition. And we need that. People are going to lose their jobs. People have to be retrained, reskilled. And also there is response measures. For example, classical oil producing countries demand money for giving up with producing fossil fuels. These are all equity issues which are there when we discuss the classical topics of mitigation, adaptation, technology, and finance. So I was talking about the problems that we are in a race against time. There is a breakdown of trust between the global north and south, and it can be seen in these 4 topics. So what are my general responses to these challenges? We need to rebuild trust because multilateralism, solidarity is, as I said, is one of the core and basic values of the United Nations. And as our problems are interrelated, the solutions have to be interrelated. That means that we have to look for systematic solutions, and we cannot think and act in silos. We have to connect the silos. We need collective action and not collective suicide, as UN General Secretary said. Otherwise, we are going to head towards collapse. And we need a breakthrough towards a greener, safer future. As it is said, we have to build back better and greener. And there is a political momentum for that. We are, and this is the Liebig's law of minimum. So we are closely related and only as strong as our weakest link. And no country is safe until all countries are safe. That is very important. If we leave one country behind, that will cause problems like climate migration. And here I'm coming to the question of, again, equity issues like climate justice, because climate justice is already a human rights justice issue. So the question is how we can act constructively, how we can go to Sharm el-Sheikh with a forward-looking approach, and that we would not turn the negotiations into a polarized blame game. By blame game, I mean that developing countries keep pointing their fingers at the global north, that you cause climate change, you should pay us more, you should do more. But at the same time, we are also demanding a lot from developing countries, that they shouldn't go through the same development path as we did. So, but at the same time, we really need a positive narrative. We have to move from incremental to systematic, from procedural to more substantive. And yes, I'm looking forward to Egyptian COP27, the next climate talk, the climate conference, where we can have more positive messages with a list of mandatory things and some nice to haves. And we should have much less non-mandatory elements. So the question is there a big fix? Is there one solution that answers the diversity of all negotiation topics. Of course, there is no big fix, but there are many small solutions that together can be the big fix for all our problems. But of course, we cannot solve the problems that we created with the same mentality and logic that led to their formation. So if you ask me, because this is the 30th anniversary of UNFCCC, what have these countries been doing for 30 years? This is extremely difficult to negotiate when everybody needs to be on board. You know, UNFCCC functions like nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And nothing is agreed until everybody agrees on everything. So we need everybody on board, and no country should be left out from the discussion. So that's why we needed so many years. But without the UNFCCC solutions, we would not be here. I wouldn't have gained the Hubert Humphrey Scholarship. You wouldn't talk about this topic because, yes, mitigation has to start from the top. This is a top-down approach from international level, and then from country to country, going to local. Without global efforts, we cannot solve a global problem. So let's go on this road from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh. In Glasgow, last year, I think, Article 6 was the most important, which is basically the rules of the Paris Agreement. The Katowice rule book was agreed, and the final decisions were made on how we can start a global emission trading scheme. Right now, we are going to Egypt. That will be an African COP. Of course, we will talk a lot about adaptation. We will talk a lot about loss and damage, and how we can set up a financial mechanism to cope with loss and damage. Just for your information, it's basically the United States who is really blocking setting up a separate financial mechanism. You say that we should use existing mechanisms. And then we are going to have a COP in the Arabic region. And then in 2024, we are going to have a COP in Eastern Europe, somewhere in the vicinity of Budapest. We have some upcoming milestones. We had a pre-COP in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right now, even in the European Union, we are next Monday, we are going to have a council when we are going to agree on the council conclusions that the European Union is going to represent. Because, for example, Hungary doesn't have its own voice. We set up as a European Union at the climate conferences. And of course, we are over a United Nations General Assembly. We are over a G7 meeting. We are heading towards a G20 in Indonesia. And we have a lot to do in the upcoming weeks as well. So we left Glasgow with ambitions. And of course, with the promise that we will double adaptation finance, and we will bring the 100 billion US dollar goal of finance, which we have to do annually. And what I see is that loss and damage and the financial mechanism will be a make or break for future negotiations. So in Egypt, we really have to agree on something. As I told you, so since Glasgow, there are some negative aspects. For example, the geopolitical context is deteriorating. There are increasing food and energy prices and inflation. And the EU is not authentic anymore. We have a dash for gas. We started increasing coal consumption because there is no gas coming from Russia. The dependency on gas is 40% on EU level. For Hungary, it's 75%. It's huge. And African countries are also criticizing Europe because we are redirecting a lot of development finance support to Ukraine, which normally goes to Africa. And what I can see, you know, there are different groups. For example, G77 plus China is the developing country negotiating group. Of course, they are not 77 anymore. They are already 140, but China is dominating it. Although Pakistan is the president, China is really dominating it, and China is questioning already agreed tax, even the text of the Paris Agreement. And that's not good, to push back on already agreed tests. And of course, we had a lot of sessions, like subsidiary body sessions in Bonn, but there is a lot of expectation towards finance on loss and damage. What are the positive things? If here from Europe, we see that although there is a war next to us, it's next to Hungary, we have 130 kilometers of border with Ukraine, and more than 200 Hungarians already died because there are 150,000 Hungarians living as a minority in Ukraine, and they all fight on Ukrainian side. And of course, we have 200 people who have already sacrificed their life. And we are in the vicinity of this geopolitical situation. And although we turn back on coal consumption and we are importing a lot of LNG from the US, liquefied natural gas, we are still very dedicated for the Fit for 55 package for keeping the 2030 and 50 climate goals. And also G7 demonstrates commitment to Glasgow, and we are more than happy that the United States has passed the Inflation Act, and also Australia had significant climate legislation. For us, for Europe, it's also a milestone. At the same time, there have been losses and damages everywhere in the US, in Europe, wildfires, forest fires, heat waves. And this raises public awareness to the need for climate action. After this summer, all Hungarians who went back to work answered a poll that, yes, climate change is really happening. What I see is that just energy transition plans that were initiated by Europe and US in African countries gain some momentum. That's good. The international financial fiscal institutions begin to create and offer some really creative responses to climate-related lending. That's good. So what will be on the agenda? Of course, we will talk about mitigation in Egypt. We will talk about the design of the Santiago network on loss and damage, and how we can really fund vulnerable developing countries. Of course, we need to demonstrate progress on the delivery of the $100 billion US goal and the doubling the adaptation finance. And there is also a new quantified collective goal on post-2025 climate finance. We probably have to double this 100 billion or triple. And we have to progress on global stocktake. Global stocktake is always about what we have done before, so that we could inform the future mitigation pledges, how they should be strengthened. So let me go for the last 2 points. And the global outlook, I just brought you some very fresh International Energy Agency slides, because I think it's very interesting that global energy investment is really picking up. And you see a global investment is happening in fuel supply, the power sector, and end use and efficiency. And the problem is that half of this increase in capital spending is linked to higher costs. So also, unfortunately, the costs increase as well. Here on this slide, you can see that in the investment that is happening in energy transition is basically happening in clean energy technologies, renewable power, infrastructure, and electric vehicles are really leading the way, and that's a good sign. What I see as a problem, and this slide shows this problem, that there is a new dividing line on energy and climate. As you can see, most of the per capita clean energy investment is happening in advanced economies. That's the blue one. The green is China, and the orange one is the emerging and developing economies. And if you have a look at the second graph, you can see that most of the emerging and developing economies, in most of them, investment remains stuck at 2015 levels. So basically, they don't grow at all, except for India, where there is a solar boom. If you have a look at sustainable finance, You can see the same trend that is gaining momentum, but again, in advanced economies in China, you can see a lot of green bonds. When we talk about sustainable debt issuances by region, we are basically talking about green bonds, but also social bonds are gaining momentum. Even my country has issued several bonds on the international European, Japanese, and Chinese market. It's really gaining momentum. And it's a major opportunity to fund energy transitions. I think you are aware of the fresh working group reports of the IPCC, the first, the second, and the third working group report. I just brought one slide. If we really want to limit warming to 1.5, we need to have a greenhouse gas emission peak before 25, and we have to reduce it by 43% by 2030. For the 2-degree warming limit, we have to peak till 25 and reduce our emissions by 27 by 2030. But if you see the current trend of the implemented policies, which is basically the business as usual scenario, we are really far from getting there. And of course, the NDCs, the national determined contributions of countries, have been strengthened. We still need more strengthened NDCs at the following COPs. The IPCC also identifies those sectors that could do a whole lot in decreasing emissions. Demand and services, that's basically the demand side management, but you can see all these sectors that can contribute. For example, energy supply can contribute by 34%, industry 24%, agriculture and land use and by 22%, transport by 15%, and buildings by 6%. And I also brought you some interesting slides because I think this is amazing. This shows the different options available in all sectors and which have actual potential. So the length means potential of mitigation, and the costs are the colors. The blue means that they are that these technologies are already available at very low cost. The yellow is still okay, it's between $0 and $20. But the more red it becomes, the more the cost efficiency of the technology is questioned. Of course, here in Europe, the benchmark is the price of emission allowances in the emission trading scheme, which is close to $100. So anything under $100, anything up to orange, is already cost efficient here in Europe. So where can you see the potential? You can see a lot of potential, already cost efficient potential in wind energy, solar energy. But you can also see it in carbon sequestration in agriculture, and also in reduced conversion of forests and other ecosystems. So if you reforest and afforest and you reduce deforestation, that has huge potential. But let me raise your attention to the last two. The last two is basically reducing food loss and food waste and shift to balanced, sustainable, healthy diets. Wow, this is something that can be done free of charge. Anybody could do it, and it has a lot of potential. Sustainable, healthy diets, less meat for sure. And let's have a look at buildings, new buildings with high energy performance. Well, this is still, it takes a lot of money, but it has huge potential. So does fuel switching in industry. And last but not least, let's not forget about fluorinated gases, F gases, which all your air conditioners contain, and reducing the use of F gases can also have a huge potential. And let me just finish with a quick European outlook, because I already talked about the Fit for 55 package that Europe is aiming at raising emission reduction target for a net 55% from the present 40. You see that There are many directives, regulations that are connected to pricing, like aviation, maritime, road transport, energy taxation. We are setting up a new carbon border adjustment mechanism, which US may not like, but we will levy imports in 5 industries. When it comes to targets, yes, there is an effort sharing regulation for building, transport, agriculture, F gases and waste. There is a lot of legislation happening in Europe on LULUCF. LULUCF means land use change, and forestry regulation. And of course, renewable energy, energy efficiency, building energy efficiency. And the last one is we will have performance standards much stricter for cars and vans. It means that from 35, we can only have we can only put new cars on the market in Europe which are electric or which use in their internal combustion engines CO2-free fuel, which is currently hydrogen, or it could be synthetic fuel. But we are also working on infrastructure, which is basically charging stations on sustainable aviation fuels and cleaner maritime fuels. And there's a lot of support measures, a lot of money going, like social climate fund for the families which are stricken by energy poverty, and there are modernization and innovation fund grants that are available for energy transition, and also the Just Transition Fund, which is available for the social economic aspects that are brought by energy transition. And of course, you can ask the impact of the war on the European Green Deal, because this whole Fit for 55 package started by the European Green Deal. And of course, this war is a reminder for us that we have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel imports. And we need more energy efficiency, more renewables. That's why we started the Repower EU program in response to the war, to scale up this green transition. We have higher targets. And also, although EU is temporarily criticized by many other developing countries for turning back to oil and gas, and actually in our negotiations blocking the developing countries from access to financing for the same goals, at the same time, this Repower EU has been strengthened to bring higher targets for renewables and energy efficiency. And we do think that this green agenda is competitive because, why? Because the increasing energy prices have shortened the return on a payment period for many renewable energy investments. And of course, our modeling indicates that phasing out Russian imports will result in higher share of renewables and more energy savings by 2030. And in the last 2 slides, I just brought you some pictures on adaptation. I am going to share with you my presentation, so it will be available for you. But the second strategy of the EU on adaptation was approved in 2021, and you can see the different regions of the EU, how the different regions are impacted by climate change, and how we would like to make adaptation smarter, swifter, systematic, and how we would like to step up international action on climate change and to have smarter adaptation. Here you can see how the critical infrastructure in Europe is going to be impacted. And here I'm talking about losses in million euros. So you can see that especially the southern countries of EU will be heavily impacted. And here you can see the impacts on the annual EU GDP by the impacts of climate change in other countries. When you see the red lines, that means more damage, more negative impact. The blue line means if we can keep global temperature increase within 2 degrees. So there is a lot at stake. Anything happening in other countries will impact us or will impact you there in the United States. That's when I said that we are only as strong as the weakest country is in our global community. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm stopping sharing my screen so that I could see you all. I will turn back my camera and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. You are muted, so I cannot hear you yet. Oh, now I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me, Barbara?
Yes, I can hear
Okay,
you.
I'll take questions from the floor here in Warren Hall first, and then we'll see if we have some questions from our online participants. So,
I can see the online questions, but I'm more than
okay,
happy.
let me start with one here.
Good, good.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. It was really informative and I appreciated it a lot. I'm just wondering if your perspective is from an optimistic point of view or a pessimistic point of view. And then another question is for my generation, like born after the 2000s, what do you think our outlook should be? Like, do you have any advice? Thank you.
It's a very good question. I am not optimistic, neither am I pessimistic. I am possibilist. I see a lot of potential in you. I see a lot of potential on the genius genius way that this human species has always survived many tragedies in its history. So I do believe in the potential, but I also know that we will all need to make sacrifices on individual level, on family level, on local community level, on country level, and on international level. We will have to sacrifice our present standards of living. You and me, Europe and the global north is much richer than 92% of the rest of the world. So we belong to the 8%. And you know, when we talk about sustainable development, it's not meeting the demands and desires of the present without compromising the meeting of the demands and desires of the future. It's about the needs. It's about the basic needs. So think about what your basic needs are. Your basic needs are food, water, and somewhere to live. And if we can meet those basic needs for everybody, then we will be better off. I think this planet could host at least 11 billion people. Right now we are 8 billion, but there is place for 11 billion, but only if we share the burdens, if we don't meet the demands and the desires, the limit of which is the sky, but the basic needs, and we pay attention to that to other countries. So don't give up. Right now you are accusing the older generations who were born before 2000 that we were not doing enough. But in 20 years' time, you will be accused by the unborn generation. What were you doing when you were sitting here in 2022 on the 19th of October at Cornell University? What were you thinking about mom and dad?
Hello, Barbara. Again, thank you so much. Christopher Brown, Baker student, so commercial real estate. Very interesting here. So regarding financing, I know that you touched on financing, adaptation versus mitigation. What you talked about green and social bonds. What other or maybe trending financial instruments that you see can deploy more capital into making a more greener, more sustainable world?
So green bonds is one thing, but there are grant type financial instruments, which are basically non-refundable instruments, and there are also refundable instruments like loans. But here at COP27, we are going to talk about loss and damages. You know, loss and damage is basically catastrophes. And 90% of the catastrophes are connected to climate change. The 10% is earthquakes, but 90% is due to climate change. And when there is a catastrophe happening in a country, then they need immediate help. And they need financial help that can be mobilized in 1 or 2 weeks' time. There is no time in handing in an application to an LDC fund or an adaptation fund or the Green Climate Fund. They need money that can be mobilized immediately. So yes, there are a lot of instruments. We need grant type instruments. We need loan type instruments. We need a lot of investment in technology and in capacity building. Many countries do that. They bring technology to countries. For example, in Ecuador, there is a Hungarian technology which produces clean drinking water from any water by using renewable energy. So any technologies that you have should be shared with these countries to alleviate the burden that they have. But any instruments could come handy for these countries, depending on the portfolio that your country is sharing. And I've just heard, because I've already received the démarche from the United States that you are basically quadrupling finance that is going to the developing world on US side, which is amazing. So I think at COP27 in Egypt, you will have a great announcement on that.
Barbara, I'm going to read a couple questions that were put into the chat or the Q&A from online participants. I'll start with one from Lydia, and she asks, besides the Ukraine war, is it okay to assume that the increase in extreme and costly climate events, floods, drought, fires, and so on, in the industrial countries is limiting their ability to meet their $100 billion pledge established in the Paris meeting? And so besides Ukraine, what other factors are causing industrialized countries to renege on their pledges, and how can the gap in financing be addressed?
Yeah, Ukrainian war is there to decrease the amount of money that flows now to the developing world, but I don't see any other factors that there could be there for this pledge. This is a pledge, as I told you, we made all in Copenhagen, and it should have been met in 2020, and we didn't bring it. And currently, it's 25% goes for adaptation and 75% mitigation. So this is not enough. And you know, when I was in Glasgow, I was talking to the Brazilians, I was going to the Chinese, I was talking to the Chinese, I was talking to the Indians, and they were saying 100 billion is not enough because there is an adaptation gap. We need more. And when we were asking how much you were thinking about an annual target, a new quantifiable goal, and he said trillion, 10 times more per year. They said trillion, and India said 13 times more than 100 billion pledge that should flow to developing countries. But there is one thing, I think it's a bit exaggerated, because if we cannot meet the 100 billion, how we could meet 10 times more? But, you know, there are always two sides of the same coin. They demand money, but they don't provide transparency. They don't want to account for the money that they get. They don't want to be transparent in their spending. And even the UK and many other countries say that I don't want my money to land on private Swiss bank accounts. I want it to be used well and smartly and in a transparent way. But these countries don't really want to provide the accountability needed, and also that there would not be double accounting for the same aid, because it's very important for us that if we give money, there should be environmental robustness in its spending. So this gap should be addressed. We should bring at least the 100 billion, but at the same time, as the EU, also the United States should be very pushy about the transparency framework to enhance transparency in its spending.
Thank you, Barbara. We're out of time. We have to relinquish our classroom to the next class, but thank you so much for sharing your perspective today with us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you and have a great day.